It's the North Shore Drive podcast on a Wednesday, and it does look like Minkah Fitzpatrick may actually be back. We talk about that. Is the Steelers' offensive line actually improving? And is Devin Bush actually improving? All these good things? That can't be right about the Steelers. We'll talk about all that right here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter here with Adam Bittner. It's going to be a fun episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. We are both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're talking all things Steelers today here on the North Shore Drive podcast, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and especially on YouTube. If you see this video, like the video if you're enjoying it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of this show and the daily content that comes out here talking all things Pittsburgh sports from the Post-Gazette. Adam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's nice to be in the passenger seat. You doing all the reads.
There we go. That's you know me. I like to quarterback things and throw it to my receivers and let them get downfield. But speaking of quarterbacking, we have to talk about the Acrisure Fan Advantage because we got our Steelers reporters quarterbacking that coverage every single week. If you want to break down to the game, there's no better place to get it because with the Acrisure Fan Advantage, you can have the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office using augmented reality. You get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure. Fan Advantage, no apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Adam, I want to talk about an edge the Steelers could have this weekend. And I didn't think there was any way this was actually going to happen, after the announcement Saturday that, Minkah Fitzpatrick has appendicitis. There's issues there. It's going to be rough. He's going to miss the Sunday game. And with it being the Saturday before the last Sunday, I was like, there's no way he'll get back by the next Sunday to play against the Bengals. And then Mike Tomlin says it's trending very positive, quote unquote. And then it sounds like Minkah Fitzpatrick's pretty healthy on a Wednesday. We'll get a full readout from the Steelers on that. But if Minkah plays and, TJ's back, and this will be the first time we've seen, I guess, the closest thing we've seen to the Steelers defense being completely healthy, what does this do for what you're looking at, their chance to actually sweep the Bengals?
Well, I mean, you think back to the first game, he has that game-changing ability to capitalize on mistakes by other teams and make them pay with with the pick six that he scored on. I think that's the best case scenario, but at the least, we've really seen him become a guy who cleans up a lot for this defense and cleans up a lot of mistakes, whether it's in run defense. And obviously when, we've seen his production kind of suffers when he's in run defense, but that's because he's cleaning things up and solving a problem you're having, which is that you haven't been great in run defense in recent years, and he's helped with that. And there's also sometimes guys there's breakdowns in coverage, and we see him in those spots too. I think in Philadelphia he didn't quite make the plays, to kind of clean up some of those things, but that's what he does for this defense. Yeah. He even if he's not generating turnovers, he can make the defense look a little better than it's been playing, because he knows where to be. And he knows where to help.
No, I agree. And here's the other thing I've been talking about this, for a while that we haven't been able to see because of all the injuries. But this team signed Damontae Kazee because of his ability to play, because he has a sense for the ball. And there were a lot of packages shown in training camp of how they were going to deploy Minkah Fitzpatrick and Damontae Kazee and Terrell Edmunds at the same time and make it kind of a base look almost for the Steelers, just setting that out there a lot. I really think that if Minkah is back and you get to see all three of those guys on the field at the same time with TJ Watt back, and you got Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Miles Jack being back, I think that would be huge too, because he didn't play Sunday. And then, of course, Alex Highsmith. You're finally seeing this defense be a lot closer to what it was designed to be. And we saw how this defense, even just without KZ and with TJ until like the late in the fourth quarter, this defense got after the Bengals. They destroyed that offensive line that was paid, that had a lot of money paid into it. PFF, projected they were going to be a top 10 offensive line. They're not looking like that right now. But they were able to destroy them. And I'm not saying they're going to have another 5 turnover or 6 or whatever many sacks they had in this game again, but I think this defense could be in a position to play the run well again, stop Joe Mixon, and force Joe Burrow to beat you. And this time, would beat you without Jamar Chase, who was really the person who I thought who was most responsible for getting the Bengals back in that game.
Yeah, and I think something I talked about with Paul on Sunday too is if you set this offense up with shorter fields, it can look a lot better than it has when you're forcing it to drive 70, 80, sometimes 90 yards, and it doesn't have to be 5 turnovers, it could be 2. Set them up with 2 short fields, maybe you get 10 points out of that. And that's sometimes enough for this Steelers offense. If it can put one long drive together, if it can get 1 short field and score another 7 points that way and get a few field goals, this defense can protect a lead like that. And I think that's the formula for success for this team. Whether there are issues on offense or not, the way things are presently constituted, that's what you need to happen probably on an average week for this team to win. So, having all your guys at full strength and being able to be dynamic instead of just slowing opposing offenses down can make a huge difference, not just defensively, but offensively.
I agree with you entirely. I think it especially like you say, you get turnovers, you give some short fields to Kenny Pickett in that offense. And we'll talk about that offense in a couple minutes here, but you get them to an offense that's figuring itself out. They have more chances to punch it in. And I think you're seeing slow but steady gains on the offense. We saw the run game awaken against the Saints. The run game wasn't waking up against. There were a lot of teams they could have ran on early in the season, and they weren't able to go. But there's a sign that hey, they can at least do it there. Now, if you could do it to the Bengals, it adds another edge to you. And I also think that, like you said, with the defense, if the defense is playing well, one thing that happened in that first game, the defense was out there for 100 snaps, Adam. Like that's what made that defensive performance even more ridiculous for me, was that they forced all those turnovers, got a pick 6, blocked an extra point at the end of the game, and then played for 100 snaps, didn't allow them to score in overtime, and then was able to help the offense get the win. They did all of that with 100 snaps in the field. Usually if a dominant defensive performance, you're looking at most like 60 snaps, because but when you start to get to 65, 70, and then approaching 80, then an offense has had a lot more chances to see what you're doing, to figure out your disguise, to guess correctly on a lot of plays. And that's when it starts to be harder to defend the field and to keep teams off the board. I think a lot of big things. This has to be complimentary football this weekend, but having Minkah Fitzpatrick back behind everything that they're trying to do on defense, I think it's a lot bigger of an edge than I think some people might realize. I think the Steelers realize it, but I think it's a really big edge for this game, even though they've been able to win 2 games without Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of reflected in the betting line. I was surprised today. I do our weekly betting guide, and I don't really look at the lines until Wednesday, because that's when I would do that work. But it's only Bengals -4, and that's one of the narrower lines that the Steelers have had against solid competition all season. It's been double digits, I think, against the Eagles. It was 8 points against Tampa Bay. These teams that are significantly better than the Steelers, and I think the Bengals fall into that category of you would expect them to be favored by a bit more, but now you're seeing the difference that having not just TJ Watt, but Minkah Fitzpatrick in there too, it's a much narrower line. And I'll tell you what, the Sharps, they're betting the heck out of the Steelers, and I think that's one of the reasons why.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how those lines change, especially if Minkah's announced officially like he's playing. We'll see the injury report on Wednesday just to get the initial sense, like how official was he in full practice, limited practice, and then especially by Friday, if he's in full practice by Friday, that's the sign it's full steam ahead. This Steelers defense is going to be out there. But we also got to talk about this offense, because Ray Fittipaldo and I talked about his grades after the game. But I think one thing that we can all agree on is that this offensive line is better than where it was when it started the season. We'll talk about what we're seeing there, what Adam's seeing from some of the analysis and the analytics being put out there about the Steelers offensive line. So don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Liquid Death. If you're out tailgating and you see someone crushing tall boy cans all day long, but they're not getting drunk, they're staying real sober, they're probably just getting hydrated with some Liquid Death. What's Liquid Death? Well, it's the best mountain spring water brand out there. If you want fresh water, you got to go get Liquid Death. And they call it Liquid Death because it's here to murder your thirst and to murder plastic pollution all across the planet, because 10% of all the profits of every can sold go to kill plastic pollution on the planet. So you can double up with health for yourself and health for the planet by drinking Liquid Death, which is not only refreshing, but comes without that plastic taste that comes with normal plastic bottles. Comes right out the can, easy to chill to a cool temperature so that you can get fresh water. Go get Liquid Death right now at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or County Fair, or find a Liquid Death retailer near you with their store located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. We're also brought to you by Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice if the holidays were stress-free? A hot tub, a swim spa, or a sauna from Valley Pool and Spa will help you feel like it is. You can relax and soak in a hot tub or a swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Refresh and rejuvenate in a Finlayo sauna that is sure to melt your stress away faster than Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all stock hot tubs, swim spas, and more hot tubs. Visit valleypoolspa.com. Again, that's valleypoolspa.com to get all your spa options. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. Adam, we saw the Steelers' run game flourish in this one. Najee Harris ran 20 times for 99 yards. Jalen Warren, I think, ran nine times for 41 yards. He really didn't get going to the end of the game there, but you saw some consistency there, but you saw some holes being opened up. It wasn't just, they ran harder. It was the offensive line actually made some space for these guys and there were less times where there were defenders in the backfield wrecking havoc on the Steelers. And I think that was a really good sign for this group. Now, they did allow Kenny Pickett to get sacked 6 times. Some of those were on Kenny, as Mike Tomlin talked about on Tuesday, because, some of the times he gets himself into trouble. But, there were some lapses. Kevin Dotson told Ray Fittipaldo that, he's dealing with a hip injury, as Mike Tomlin noted at the beginning of the week. But I think Dan Moore, he gave up a sack in this game, but he also was a really good run blocker in this game. What did you see when you were looking at the game and then the analytics and how people are grading these guys out?
Yeah, especially when I do my weekly PFF grades post and recap of the most interesting things of the week. We'll leave the link to that in the description for you guys. But the thing that stuck out to me, Dan Moore played his best game ever as a Steeler. His run blocking score was second only to Christian Darrisaw among all offensive linemen in the NFL.
That's impressive, because Christian Darrisaw mows people down. If you don't go watch some of his highlights. He just throws people to the ground all day.
Yeah, so he was right there. And it wasn't just Dan Moore. It was Pat Freiermuth put forth his best run blocking game. James Daniels put forth his best run blocking game, and you see the result. And it doesn't have to be everyone all the time, but if you have one or two guys playing really well and reliably run blocking, it can make a huge difference for whoever's back there. And I think that's what we saw this week, is that it wasn't just one guy. It was 3 guys. It wasn't the whole line, but it was enough to make a noticeable difference.
I agree. And you saw, I think, guys combo blocking, because that's one thing that hasn't happened enough, in my opinion, with the Steelers, is that there's times where like 3 or 4 guys will do the right thing, and then there's one guy that just misses and it's right at the point of attack, or it's right on the player who's going to blow the play up, and it destroys a lot of opportunities. And Najee Harris did say after the game that, like, hey, we focused more on the during the bye week. Coach Tomlin charged him with more of like doing things to work with the offensive line to get to that they can be better together as a group. And I think we saw the fruits of that labor. You even saw, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren kind of like, congratulating each other and like, dapping each other up at the end of the game, when they were, when they were kind of switching on and off in the fourth quarter, as the Steelers were running 4-minute offense to grind the clock out and, make sure that their offense stayed on the field and not to give the Saints another chance. They're feeding off of this stuff, and you're seeing them kind of come together a little bit. And I think that's really encouraging for an offense that we've said all season long, they don't have an identity. They're not a deep passing team. They're not a short passing team. They're not a running team. They're not a play action. What are they? They're not, they can't do anything consistently well. They still haven't done anything consistently well, but they've at least had a game where they rushed for over 200 yards. And now there's a sense of like, okay, maybe we call more of these 12 personnel packages. Maybe we get these tight ends on the field more, and then we run the ball, we play action, and then that's how we set up a foundation for Kenny Pickett to kind of work from.
Yeah, and it's more than just the blocking too, Chris. Both guys, both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris averaged significantly better than 3 yards per carry after contact. That means once they've been touched, once the line's a little less involved, especially Najee Harris was much more elusive than he's been. I think I did a YouTube short about a month ago saying, his numbers there just weren't great, and we saw another yard per carry after contact, and the difference that made for him. Now, granted, a lot of that came on that big run, when he gained 36 and was rumbling, and you don't want to overhype it, but the fact that he was more elusive overall is going to make, when you see that add up over 20 carries, it's going to make a noticeable difference, and that's exactly what happened against the Saints.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, can this be replicated? Can they do this? And there's going to be other defenses that come in that are better than the Saints. The Saints are not a good team. But here's what I'll say is that, Adam, the Bengals are one of the better teams that they're going to have on their schedule for the rest of the year. But they've got the Colts coming up. They've got the Falcons. They've got the Panthers. They've got the Raiders. There's a lot of teams that have been very inconsistent, have struggled on a lot of on both sides of the ball. And to me, the Bengals aren't exactly a great team right now. They're the reigning AFC champions, but they're hovering around 500. They haven't been consistent. They've gotten destroyed in some games. And I said I don't think that they're in for it, because some people were just saying, oh, they're going to run it back and win the AFC. I'm like, no, they're not, because there's a lot of good AFC teams that are above them. And I think that they are, I always believe in the saying, styles make fights. Like, it's not simply, hey, this team's more talented than this team, so they're going to win. How is a team more talented than another team? And I think the Steelers defensive line can beat up on the Bengals offensive line better than the Bengals defensive line can beat up on the Steelers offensive line, which sounds crazy when you think about, like, well, doesn't the Steelers offensive line stink? They're not good, but if they are able to make strides forward, I think it gives the Steelers even more of an advantage to dominate the trenches.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, still, the Steelers have the 11th ranked pass blocking score on Pro Football Focus right now, and that's just one source. It's not everything, but right. It's not bad by any objective measure. 11th is not bad. It's not great. It's not phenomenal. They were as high as second or third, after those first 4 games, and they've definitely dropped off from there. And maybe they're kind of just average, but average is a big difference for this team, considering where they've been the past few years. And honestly, compare them to the Bengals. While we're talking about the Bengals, the Bengals have been atrocious on their offensive line. They've given up a ton of sacks. And it's if you're grading these two teams against each other, the Steelers definitely have done a better job of coaching up this offensive line, getting the most out of it. That doesn't mean you don't want to improve it in the offseason. That doesn't mean you want to get some more long-term fixtures here. But it does mean that in the short term, the Steelers made some good decisions, and in some ways they're enjoying the fruits of that.
I mean, this is also a Bengals team that is paid good money to players like Lyle Collins, like Alex Kappa, to try to come in and help out an offensive line with Jonah Williams. They've spent top 10 picks on this group. They've spent good money on this group, millions upon millions of dollars in free agent signings to try and fix this group, and they haven't. And the Steelers, I mean, they brought in Mason Cole and James Daniels, but that's like, not doing much. They paid Chukwu Okorafor to stay. That's the most significant, I think, commitment that they've made to the line. But I mean, Kevin Dotson and Dan Moore Jr. are 4th round picks, and they're just, and Chukwu himself is a 3rd round pick. So I think it's going to be very interesting if the Steelers offensive line outplays the Bengals offensive line. I think it allows for a tone to be set. I also think it puts Joe Burrow in a much tighter spot. Joe Burrow, he's a guy that I look at, like, he plays well when everything's going great around him. But when the Bengals are struggling, when his receivers aren't dominating the way that Jamar Chase dominates when he's off and on the field, I think he's not a bad quarterback, but he's not Patrick Mahomes, who can just lift his team out with ridiculous play after ridiculous play. He's not Josh Allen, who can do that a lot as well. I think that he's a guy that if you take away Joe Mixon in that run game, which I think the Steelers can, and they did the last time, if you get pressure on Joe Burrow, I think you put yourself in a very good position to win. But we also got to talk about another key factor stopping the run, and that's the improved play of the Steelers linebacker group, especially Devin Bush. I want to talk about that more with Adam Bittner in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers, as you're gearing up for the rest of the Steelers, making their second half of the season push, trying to come back at 3-6 right now. Can they make a playoff push? Well, you can support them as they do that by going to Yinzers in the Berg and getting all your Steelers gear. They also have Penguins gear, Pirates gear, Penguins gear. They have Pitt gear. All sorts of Pittsburgh sports things right there. And there's 2 legendary shops in the Strip District that they got for you. They're always growing right now. They always got new stuff coming in. And they have an online store that you can go to at yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com to go to Yinzers in the Berg, the ultimate place for Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. We'll see you in the Strip District, or you can check them out online again at yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. We're the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we're finishing up here. Early last year, there was a lot of Devin Bush talk because he did have a bad season. It wasn't a good year. He was, he was playing at a level that wasn't the level of a first round 10th overall pick, and frankly, he's still not there. A 10th overall pick is supposed to be a game changer guy, and I think it's easy to still say, yeah, the Steelers, they did not hit on a ton of caliber guy that they want there. But Devin Bush is playing like a real starting linebacker. He is an asset to this team right now, and it didn't show up in the stat sheet in this game. I think he only had like a tackle or 2, Adam. But when you look at when I look at the all 22 and I'm watching where he's at, he's attacking the line. He's taking on blockers a lot better. He's back to being his aggressive self, which is what the Steelers said he would get back to, what Vince Williams said he would get back to, and what Devin Bush said he'd get back to. I think it's interesting that he's living out and starting to show the things that they were being patient about.
Yeah, you watch the film. I look at the analytics. That's kind of our roles here at the PG. And Devin Bush had his best grade of the season against New Orleans, and I think something like 4 of the last 5 games he's been rated at a 60 or higher. I kind of look at 60 as the baseline of are you being at least somewhat productive? Are you making the team better than you are making it worse? I think anything under 60, you're making the team worse, and if you're over 60, you're probably making it better. And he's been in that range, and so it hasn't been much. Again, you're right. It's not 10th overall pick kind of stuff. It's not Ryan Shazier stuff, which is I think what a lot of people had in mind for Devin Bush when he was drafted. But it's still productive. It's still production. It's still making them a little bit better, and that's why the run defense as a whole, is a little bit better. I think you throw Miles Jack in there; he's been better than Joe Schobert, statistically speaking. Even Robert Spillane had a great game in run defense this past week. He's never going to be anything special, but as long as those guys are not getting exposed the way they were last year, the numbers are going to naturally get better, especially as we go into the second half of this schedule where you mentioned there's some teams that the Steelers can beat.
No, I agree. I think they need to be able to take away the run, and they need to be able to cover the middle part of the field. And I also think that with them being back, I think with Devontae KZ and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Terrell Edmonds being healthy, the Steelers are going to deploy those guys a lot, and they're going to use them all over the middle part of the field, especially on those passing downs on like 2nd and long and 3rd down when it's more predictable to see the ball go in the air. Because they're also confident in a lot of those guys helping against the run, coming up and filling against the run. And I think you're going to be able to see, a Robert Spillane not have to be in coverage as much. Like there were a lot of plays where I was watching Sunday, even live, not just watching the film, but like live, where Alvin Kamara would motion out to the slot and Robert Spillane would be the closest guy to him. And I'm like, Andy Dalton's going right there. He's going right there. It's obvious he's going right there. And then sure enough, he'd go there. Sometimes it wouldn't work. Sometimes it would, but if Spillane can just be in a role like, hey, your job is to either stuff the run or blitz the quarterback, I think that's where he's at home. And then he becomes an asset. He's not a liability. And then you have guys who can, if it is a run, they're on the field. People usually think, oh, there's more defensive backs. They can't help against the run. These safeties can. They're aggressive. They play that way. I really think that this is a key that the Steelers could have. And also Devin Bush, with how quick he can be, he doesn't have the ultimate speed of a safety, but he's a guy who you could put in the middle part of the field, let him play a little bit of coverage, and he can run with guys. And I think that's huge for what this Steelers defense is trying to do.
Yeah, especially because that matchup nightmare you mentioned with Alvin Kamara is exactly what we've seen opposing offenses try to get. And it's harder to get those if you have better players on the field. And I think that's what, we have the potential to see here. If you have those three safeties, if you have a Devin Bush playing at a higher level, teams just can't necessarily set themselves up in those mismatches as often. And so that's the impact, kind of bringing the episode full circle. It can be a symbiotic relationship where everyone benefits from this guy being on the field, or everyone benefiting from Devin Bush not being great but being significantly better. It just takes away things that opposing offenses do to attack, and that's why it feels like this unit has gotten significantly better, as it should, considering we should never forget to bring up that they're making a ton of money, right? Like, this is what they're paid to do, and there's a formula for the Steelers to win, and they need to be a key part of it.
And I do think it's going to be interesting. A lot of people were saying when the Steelers were losing games, oh, they're $100 million defense getting treated like this. Well, about $30 million of that dollars was off the field with TJ Watt. About another $20 million of that was off the field when Minkah Fitzpatrick wasn't playing. And then, the cornerbacks who were making like $5-6 million were off the field. Like, I was just like, at some point, they're like a $50 million defense. And that's not even like, that's like the worst. That's like, that would be the lowest paid defense in the league. So, like, let's put some realism in this. And now these guys are healthy. Now we can get to see what's this defense really about. What's their identity going to be for the whole season? And heck, you've seen in the 2 games that TJ Watt has played, Alex Highsmith has 5.5 sacks. I think he has 8 on the season right now. I think the Steelers are in a very good place defensively. They need the offense to continue to climb. It's not all sunshine and rainbows for the Steelers team. They're 3-6 at the end of the day. They have to play very well if they're going to climb back and to be a playoff contender by the end of December. But I think there's enough talent on this defense that if they can get healthy and they can put together the performances, we might see some impressive showings from the Steelers defense. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, especially with these injury reports, what's the outlook? Can they actually sweep the Bengals? Because they beat them in week 1. If they sweep the Bengals, I think it would be a huge statement for what's kind of been a rekindled rivalry of late between these two franchises.
Yeah, and I'm gonna keep preaching this gospel, Chris. It's not even necessarily about, are you going to be a playoff team this year? It's about, are you going to be a good team at the end of next year?
Yeah.
When Kenny Pickett is in his second season and you've got some payroll flexibility because of that. Can you be a good team by the end of next year and go into next year's playoffs as a real threat, and not just a team like they've been the last handful of years that kind of just slides into the playoffs and then, bows out in the first round? And I think that's what you want to see the Steelers defense do, because a lot of these guys are going to be around. A lot of these guys are under contract. TJ Watt's not going anywhere. Minkah Fitzpatrick's not going anywhere. Cam Hayward's not going anywhere. And if some of these other guys play well, they're probably not going to go anywhere either. I think Terrell Edmonds might be someone you lose. Devin Bush, who knows? Given his contract situation, his declined 5th-year option, I think maybe they wish they had picked it up now, given the way he's played a little bit better. But anyway, the point is, you want to see this team rounding into being a contender, and that's what the rest of this season is all about. Are you better than where you started? When you have all your guys on the field, do you look like a defense that can win at a high level? And we've seen it when TJ Watt's been there, and now it's just a matter of doing it consistently. I think you mentioned it earlier. You need to be consistent and do it week after week. And sometimes you'll win some, sometimes you'll lose some, but at the end of the season, you're going to have more wins than losses if the Steelers defense plays like that more often than not.
Absolutely. He's Adam Bittner. I'm Chris Carter. We will have another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast on Friday when I talk to Brian Batko about the Steelers' chances this week and our final look at for a preview for that big game that will be at Acrisure Stadium, 425. It was flexed out of the night game spot, but hey, no complaints here. Yeah, exactly. Like Adam's shaking his 2 thumbs up, baby. We got no complaints. We want to go to bed.
No late deadlines.
No late deadline. But we are looking forward to that. It's going to be exciting. Check out the North Shore Drive podcast on Friday. Adam, thanks for joining me here on the show. Again, check out this show Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and this channel on YouTube every day of the week for all your Pittsburgh sports content from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. Thanks for checking us out. Again, back Friday with another fun episode, wrapping up the week.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.